The Ease of Control, Part 3. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, continuing to share with you the observations that I have obtained in relation to the way that people view death and the emotions associated around that, particularly linked to fear, that have enabled me to understand people to a greater degree by absorbing the way that they look at the concept of death when it's close, so that the grim reaper's icy breath falls upon their brow, or where but it is a distant thought. Understanding the way that people regard death assists me with the ease of my control over them. Awareness of impending death invariably, for most people, creates anxiety. I have faced situations where my impending death has been very much at the focus of my mind. I have been in situations where I risked being killed. I experienced no anxiety. I'm built differently. Of course, I have no desire to die. I have no desire to be killed. I very much like being alive. I very much like what being alive brings for me. And therefore, I was able to ensure that that brush with death was simply that, a brush. Death was not impending for me. There was no certainty that it was going to occur, but that's not the case with other people. What I have noticed is that dynamics of anxiety are dependent mainly on the potential proximity of death, a sense of the time remaining which regulates taking of appropriate mechanisms to mitigate that fear of death. The initial stage is an acute phase and is initiated by the realization of the inevitability of approaching death. The consequence of this, I've noted, is an initial increase in anxiety, which, at an individual level, begins to decrease gradually, depending on the effectiveness of defense mechanisms. I want to know about people's defense mechanisms. I want to know about them so that I can understand them. I want to know about them so that I can dismantle and surmount them. And also I want to know about them so that I can utilize that in my work in educating all of you. The chronic life-death phase is the time taken to adapt to the changing conditions of life that are as a consequence of the physical transformation of the body. And invariably, there comes with that hindrances, restrictions, and much dependence on others. This phase is invariably one where there is intensive medical therapy, and the intervention of that can bring both hope, that false mistress, and also despair. Those medical interventions that are supporting or life-saving gradually reduce with the approach of the moment of death. The terminal phase is mainly characterized by an acceptance of death and the irreversibility of the situation. We are all going to die. When that be, that will vary. But the fact is that notwithstanding impending death, I've noted the scrabbling for hope, the despair that is etched across somebody's face as that realization creeps across them that the end is nigh. I've often noted that the individual turns away from the outside world. They become absent from others. They delve into their inner world. That can be a point of frustration for one such as I, as it is almost as if they are trying to place themselves beyond my reach, that no longer connecting with the outside world, that they become withdrawn, that they retreat to some inner sanctum. I noted with interest that Avery D. Wiseman offered a different approach to these phases of dying. Wiseman's a psychiatrist who identified 3 stages of confrontation with the impending death of the terminally ill person. All of their phases contain simultaneous denial and acceptance. The first phase is the emergence of the first alarming symptoms indicative of the seriousness of the situation, even though the diagnosis is not yet known. I've noted here that the patient is apt to self-deception, to restrict access to thinking about death. Their fear of considering that is what is awaiting them is such that they practice this self-deception. They simply do not wish to confront it. They do not wish to contemplate it. In the second phase, the diagnosis is now clear, and invariably the terminally ill individual is subjected to intensive medical therapy. Thereafter, the next stage includes their decline of the body and the deepening exhaustion of the patient. Their attitude moves towards acceptance. It's here that opportunities exist to bring that person under greater control, to bring influence to bear upon them as they've grown weary of their material existence. In other instances, individuals see signs of the oppressive conditions of life. There's a confrontation with information and frequent denial of their situation. This is often not helped by those around the sick person. They often deny the actual state of that individual's health. And, to my mind, even though those individuals may well be characterized by exhibiting emotional empathy, either as empathic people or normals or even narcissistic, but not narcissists, they actually hinder that individual who is unwell because that person wants to get to the truth of their status. I've noticed that this increases suspicion on their part, that there is analysis of the information about their health status. They pore over the scraps and the communications, trying to get to the truth. But ultimately, they may well be practicing a form of self-deception, driven by their desire to ensure that they are healthy. They then cross the border with an intention to a conditional state of mind. Here, they recognize suddenly the hopelessness of the situation. I find it fascinating to watch when an individual is at this juncture. Hope, misleading as always, had kept them in a state of mind with optimism. But it is fascinating to watch it drain away, almost like the water going down a plug hole. Buoyancy, optimism, hope, all are sucked away from them, leading to an outcome of despair, of denial, and then apathy. I've noticed the preoccupation with focusing on minutiae, which is of little importance. Thereafter, there is a recognition of the precarious balance of everyday life, and an almost simplistic view of the world. Here, anger, helplessness, and resentment arrive, and thereafter comes the breakdown of self-orientation. In other words, the individual experiences a loss of control over themselves and the environment. They feel alienated. Other people become strangers to them. There then is an attempt to come to terms with their trajectory towards death. They have full consciousness, and then, finally, I've noticed those that seek to understand the meaning of life, that they're seeking an escape from their present situation. In essence, the individual has demonstrated that they're experiencing a developmental and situational crisis. The problems that they have in dealing with these traumatic situations lead to social, psychological, and physical disintegration. Those that are experiencing such proximity to death, i.e., the terminally ill, demonstrate the imbalance between the ensuing problems and the available means to solve them. Those near to death exhibit tension, frustration, hopelessness, internal integration, discouragement, and the inevitable resignation. I will continue with my observations about death and how it functions and the way that people's views are formed by it as I understand them to ensure my ease of control over them in part 4.